Welcome to Frisky, a podcast on everything marketing and sexuality with Athanasia and Daniela. Thank you for listening and thank you for joining us again.
Hi everyone.
Hey.
We're glad to be back, and today we have a special guest.
Yes, we have with us Jacob Ostberg from Stockholm University, professor in marketing and lovely co-editor of our book on sexuality in marketing. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, thank you so much for having me as a guest.
It's amazing to have you, and we look forward to have a chat with you. So let's begin by asking you of your experience co-editing the book with us. How did you find the whole endeavor, and also what sparked your interest to work on this space and edit a book on sexuality in marketing and consumption?
I thought it was really great that you invited me to be part of this project. The different themes that we bring up in the book are issues that have popped up here and there over the last couple of decades during conferences, and some people talk about it, but there is not a big substantial mass of work covering this. So collecting the bits and pieces and showing that if you take what's there, it actually becomes something rather substantial, and showing that to the world, and also making people realize the interconnections between various separate fields. I thought that was a tremendously important piece of work, not least in today's situation where issues of, I would suggest that we see some sort of a backlash towards the more open-minded view on sexuality and gender issues that we have maybe seen for a couple of decades, and we're seeing a backlash. So collecting kind of the more progressive views that I think we collect in the book is also really important in moving forward. So hopefully this book will become even more important as we move into the uncertain future.
Yes, Jacob. Actually, Athanasia and I are both nodding while you're saying this, and you're right. It feels really important to collect progressive views, sort of liberal views to a certain extent. And it's amazing that we that we could gather together scholars that kind of converge in that, because we don't come from the same institutions, we don't have the same agenda, but we agree on the sort of opportunity to talk about sexuality and marketing in this sort of open, as an open field to a certain extent, rather than closing opportunities down as what we're seeing now, like, as you said, a backlash. So I remember when Athanasia and I sent you that email to ask you if you wanted to join the project, and it was I remember that the thought behind it was, we need a professor. We need someone experienced that knows the field, that has been working in the area for a long time. And of course, you came to mind. So this is actually to compliment you for your, having opened up this thread of research as well in our field. Do you want to say a little bit how your interest in sexuality has started? Relating to marketing research?
Well, I think when I did my PhD thesis around the turn of the century, dealing largely with issues on food and health, and not really getting into to issues of gender and sexuality at all. But the more I was reading about these topics, and the more I was getting into kind of the consumer, what we now call consumer culture theory work and so forth, and sociology of consumption and related fields, I found myself always being intrigued by the stuff that dealt more with gender and sexuality, and I started seeing that popping up even in my research on food that I naively back then didn't think had much to do with these kinds of issues. Now I would have a very different view on that. But so I started seeing that as interesting, and looking at research slightly outside of my original domain, and then I wrote a paper together with a colleague and went to one of the the gender conferences that is going on in our field, not really knowing what to expect. And I was certainly not a gender scholar at the time, but then I had a very positive experience going there, and felt like this is interesting discussions going on, and really nicer people in this field than in any other field that I've encountered in marketing. So I felt like this is a space where I would like to explore ideas moving forward. So that's how I kind of got into doing this, not out of an ideological conviction or any sort of enlightenment, but rather much haphazardly. But then once I was there, I realized that this is there are so many things here that I want to explore. And I remember my first gender conference. I was watching a very nice research presentation by a woman, Anu Valtunen, a Finnish scholar that I'm sure that you've both met, and she was talking about the experiences of being a short woman, saying that there's a standard of being tall, but I'm short, and hence I do not live up to the standards of what you're supposed to be. And I was sitting there and thinking that, well, this is interesting, and then I from that, as your mind wanders in various different ways. And I realized that I had read quite a bit of stuff on body ideals for men, and they all dealt with how you should be, well built. You should have, muscular shoulders, and you should have a sharp chin, and you should, have big biceps and whatnot. And I had this like, well, wait a second, aren't we missing something here? Something that is perhaps rather obvious, but that for various, not least methodological reasons, will not pop up if you talk to men about their sense of living up. So that sparked my interest in exploring some issues of male body ideals. And then I published a paper called "Thou Shalt Sport a Banana in Thy Pocket," which was really the first thing I ever wrote dealing with gender and sexuality issues, very much a media analysis of discourses surrounding appropriate penis sizes, which was really interesting and sparked some I wouldn't say interest, but sharp disdain from certain parts of the field, and others an amused interest in why I would pay attention to these unnecessary and silly issues. But that was kind of my way into the field, and then I've explored various different things moving on from there.
Amazing. I remember reading that paper when I was a PhD, and I remember loving the title. I was like, I bet the author has sat for around half an hour thinking, what is the most ridiculous title I could give to this paper? And it worked. And I thought it was really, for me was really a wise choice to talk about, because I remember you had also examples from the penis enlargement industry or something like advertising on the topic. So something that we are surrounded by, and of course, like we have encountered. And I remember that I was even targeted by these ads, like at the, when Facebook wasn't that probably fine registered in that sense. So these were things around me that I'd seen, but at the same time, these were things that were not talked about. So there was a lot of conversations on women's bodily ideals, but the sort of how would that translate into the male world, and especially this aspects of genitalia. I thought that is brilliant, because there is a whole industry moving around it, whole sets of conversations, insecurities, that really belong to this world. And I think it was really very wise that you sort of shed light to that, even if I'm pretty sure you got some really interesting comments afterwards.
The title is definitely iconic, and I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with this title? And also, in this paper, you touch a lot on the topic of toxic masculinity. I don't know if you're using that term in that paper, but definitely talking about the levels of anxiety and embarrassment that men experience in relation to these messages is very topical, especially at the moment, where discourse around toxic masculinity is more prevalent, both on social media and mass media. So can you tell us a little bit around that? How did you start to tap into these conversations around toxic masculinity?
Right, and just to mention the title first, I wanted to find something that captured the archaic nature of the issue, and not being a native speaker, I didn't know whether this made any sense whatsoever, and I played around with it, and I thought it sounded absolutely ridiculous, but also captured the essence. And also, I think that's a red thread that kind of runs through much of the things I tend to engage in, is that I like the balance of the serious and the somewhat silly, and this topic tends to be trivialized by smirking and by not, like, come on, let's not take it seriously, because if you take it seriously, it comes up in all its in all its potential ridiculousness. I don't think it's a ridiculous topic, but it has that potential. So I think that's so that was one of the reasons I want to capture this a little bit. But also the toxic masculinity. It's hard, but I don't think toxic masculinity was as much of a concept back then as we see today. It might also just be my ignorance. This paper came out in 2010, if I remember correctly, and so it was written a couple of years before that. But I don't think toxic masculinity was really as much talked about then as it is now. I don't know if that's a reflection of toxic masculinity that it has gotten worse since. I think it's been pretty bad all along, but I think we today see some extreme expressions of that at least me, I was fantasizing that those things were in the past, and we're now moving towards a brighter future. I think the last couple of months have clearly shown that that's not the case. So I think more and more in dealing with masculinity, I've seen that this toxic element of it is really hard to get away from. And no, please go ahead.
When we invited you for the podcast, we sort of brainstormed some idea, and we sort of joined together in the idea that now we're witnessing a sort of excessive masculinity, or convergence between masculinity and excess. Like, what do you think of it?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely correct, and we're seeing it in various different ways. And I'm working at Stockholm University, and doing a lot of my research here in Sweden. And I've been doing a project for a long time that I really should finish up, but but that's the way it always is, I suppose. But where I've been looking at what I call the working title is Fragile Masculinity in the Welfare State. Because here in Sweden, we've seen several decades of very official kind of a feminist state policy, that one of the goals of the state has been to provide possibilities for equality between the sexes, and to more or less overtly do away with patriarchy. And men and women have largely been on board in this project together, almost together. Because when I've been, at a surface level, and especially if you talk to men who are well educated and not too far on the right side of the political spectrum, they will be very good at speaking the language of the official state feminist policy and pinpointing to how important it is to be living in equal relationships and so forth. But even in this country, and we typically rank very highly on equality indexes and so forth. I mean, you can question whether those are valid, but they perhaps say something. But even here, as I was doing interviews with Swedish men, I could see that there was a tendency to talk nicely and be very polished, and then there would be these outbursts of what Mark Zuckerberg maybe would see as a raw, primitive, masculine energy, and saying that, well, but you also need to be a man. And then these examples of excess, of kind of an outpouring of masculine energy, as they would put it, really came to the fore. And the more I've been looking into that, I see that it has like connections to these kind of more classical theoretical notions of excess coming from, for example, Georges Bataille, of kind of expenditure without return. It's not work hard, get much back, but it's like, no, this energy just need to be spent in unproductive ways. So I saw that even in very quote unquote civilized Sweden, I saw that, and then now looking over the Atlantic to the current developments in the US, we're seeing this in a much more unhinged kind of way, how the raw masculine energy is being poured out.
Yes, and how do you think, I mean, do you think there is anything specific to the Swedish man? Because it's quite surprising. We always think about Sweden as this sort of Eden of gender equality. What is like this idea of excess for? How do they think about this excessive energy when you interview them?
Well, it's not that I've asked them specifically to talk about excess. So and maybe if I move forward and do more field work, I should also do that. But it's almost like, so what they express is that all this, taking care of the family, doing the equal share of household work, leaving work early to pick up at the daycare, and they talk about, it feels good, but it also builds up almost like a tension, and then I need to go running for 2 hours straight, or I need to also so it kind of feeds nicely into this, they frame it as, but you also need to take care of your body. So this healthcare regime, which sounds nice and tidy, but I do think there is something darker in this, because that on the surface also, taking care of your body sounds very much like that's good and healthy. But I think there's some sort of unleashing of this built up energy, or they feel like they're regaining their masculinity. And it's also like, so I can run for 2 hours and then I jump into the water even though it's freezing cold, and then I run home in wet clothes because I don't care. So these kinds of things, they might sound innocent, and maybe they are innocent, but I think they're also indicative of something larger. And that's why I'm talking about this fragile masculinity. They feel like they need to prove themselves in various different ways.
This is really interesting, especially given the Swedish context. But also, I don't know if this is something that came up in your interviews with men, or from your own research around their experience with red pill content, perhaps online, or online conversations around masculinity and how to be a masculine man, because we've seen a rise in this type of content on male dating coaches, for example, where they tell men how to be masculine and how to approach dating and women. So is this something that has come up in any way?
No, it hasn't, but that's only a matter of the people I've chosen to interview, because I wanted to look at these men that on the surface seem to be pro equality and the kind of men that the Swedish state would be proud of and point to and say, like, look what we have achieved. So these are not kind of the red pill community kind of people. They are aware of that, but they would talk about people like, I forgot his name, the podcaster superstar from down in
Andrew Tate? No.
Yes, Andrew Tate is the name I'm searching for in my brain. Andrew. So they would refer to Andrew Tate, but only as a kind of, yeah. There's darkness and there are bad things and it's horrible influence and I can't believe that. So they're not on board with that, or either officially or unofficially. I think they see that as highly problematic. But I do think they also give maybe not express, but there is an undertone of certain of those tendencies still, even in their very civilized way of talking about these things. But so while that's all, and these kinds of trends are also happening here in Sweden, but that's not something I've been looking at. So I've looked at a different type of man.
I find that in a lot of research around masculinity, there is this sort of resonance around masculinity as untamed, like as exactly the Zuckerberg version, like raw, primitive energy that needs to come out before getting tamed by the world of family, of femininity. I think we shared in the past this paper, Jacob, off the leash and out of control, the one on sociology on masculinity and stag tourism. So how stag do's have created a whole tourism in Eastern European countries where men basically do all the testosteronic performances, really, from getting overdrunk and passing out in public spaces to arresting women and all of that, just before tying the knot, because that's the moment in which all this energy needs to come out. And for those of you listening, and you might be wondering, but where is the boundary between gender and sexuality? And I think that this topic is where they sort of come together a bit, because it's not just about being a man, but about this being the alpha male in the situation, around, again, showing that you are harder and broader and louder than everyone else, really testosteronic in a certain, ready to fight. I feel like that even Mike Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, like, sort of promising, that they could have a fight down. I mean, find that.
Yeah. No, but it's a lot about that.
What do you guys want to do?
Yeah. No, but this cage fight that never happened between Musk and Zuckerberg, was it? Yeah, that's just totally bizarre. But they were both, and also displaying their new, muscular bodies, really letting this virility show on the outside. And it's I was going to say it's funny, but it's not funny at all. But we were smirking at Putin a couple of years back when he was slightly younger, and he was riding bare-chested and on horses without a saddle, and jumping into rivers and finding treasure. I mean, so he was this, and we were laughing at this as an old-fashioned display of masculine energy, and now we're largely seeing similar things with, for example, Mark Zuckerberg displaying his muscular body after having taken MMA lessons and whatnot. So these, and I think, speaking of excess, I think it's really seeing this masculinity as an excessive performance, this expenditure without return, to speak with Bataille. I think that's I think that's quite useful. We see this almost like a compulsive overperformance, too much. It's like, yeah, I'm so much man that it can't be contained in this one body. It just seeps out. And also these displays of virility, dominance, and stoicism. I think it's quite striking. And also amongst my rather civilized Swedish men that I talk to, who are upper middle class family men, largely cisgender, able-bodied, everything. So they're at multiple levels of privilege, but even there, they are, getting into things such as maybe not fully engaging, but at least saying that, yeah, I think I need to take up boxing or something a little more hardcore masculine, because I'm there is something inside me that needs to come out, and moving more towards sexuality in a very basic form. Of course, one way of showing your masculinity in a rather archaic form is to sleep with many women. These are family men, so they at least in our interviews did not suggest that they were sleeping around. They were, however, sometimes quite explicit about pointing out to their earlier days of excess, but also pointing towards friends. So even though these are fairly stable family men, of course they are middle-aged. So in their circles there would be couples that have divorced, and the post divorce excess of sleeping around, fueled by contemporary dating culture and so forth. So they talked about that, not so much getting into details about their friends, but saying that he was kind of like, we were kind of the same, and once he got divorced and started exploring what's the world out there, oh my God, he was really sleeping around excessively. That would happen to me too. It's inside me. I'm containing it because I'm a good man, but you should know that it's there. So even this virility in terms of it's very it's a fantasy that they nurture and like to talk about. It brings a sense of dominance to them in a certain sense. So I think it's there in a primitive form. Yeah.
This is quite interesting, and although this is not about your informants, but I can see this pipeline from fragile masculinity to toxic masculinity and red pill rhetoric. And I think that what makes it dangerous is that there are these underlying assumptions and this yearning for dominance and being a very masculine man, even in this setting.
Yeah, I think I fully agree, and I think one can draw parallels to incels, where this from fragile to dominant takes a different and much more problematic route. But there are, as I said, parallels in the sense of, okay, I'm living right now a life where my masculinity is not really in full bloom, and I need to find ways where I can let that come out, because it's this force that I and with incels it takes a certain type of expression. Here it's a different type of expression, but I think it's similar in kind of a certain side. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about sexuality, but not necessarily about their own sexuality, but these fantasies about what would happen if they would be divorced. Is this a way for them to protect how people understand their sexuality, or how they approach sexuality and sex themselves within marriage? And what role does sex have in these men's lives?
It's an interesting and important question that that I did not get into, and I probably should, but I had not set up the interviews in such a way that I felt comfortable getting into these questions in detail. That would have been interesting, but it would also have led to very different ethical review board application that probably would not have passed. So I needed to stick within certain boundaries of what I could talk to them about.
Fascinating that is so hard to do research on sex and sex life in day to day. As you said, ethical review boards in universities would probably block everything before, or at least pose a couple of questions. And while this is so hard to do at the research level, at the same time we have to live with the image of Elon Musk holding a chainsaw, like as you remarked, well, like a very phallic display of virility. So on one hand is somehow hidden, like all the complexity of our lives, but on the other side is just in our face. That excessive virility is really putting sort of sex tropes in our face, and we cannot unsee them, unfortunately. So
and this, I think it's hard to view Elon Musk's waving around with a surprisingly large chainsaw as anything else than a as you say, a display of phallic masculinity intended to compensate for something. And it feels like the entire Republican Party in the U.S. as it has been taken over by Trump and his loyal followers is so much a display of this a performance of over-the-top masculinity, not least in the way that it shows this clear abject towards the feminine, and how everything connected to femininity needs to be taken away. I mean, symbolic acts like removing these free sanitary products from university, that needs to be taken away. We can't have that kind of thing being seen. That should be hidden. And I remember it was kind of a long time ago, but I remember because it was such a striking example of this abject towards the feminine during one of the was when Hillary Clinton lost against Trump, so it's many years ago, but when they were having a very long debate and she needed a bathroom break, and he went on for minutes about how disgusting that was. That she needed a bathroom break, and that's disgusting. How could you have that's the kind of thing that only women do, and therefore they cannot lead. Horrible. It's just
weak bladders.
It takes bizarre expressions that I wish we could laugh at because they're so stupid, but you cannot really. The consequences are too dark to be laughed off.
Amazing. Jacob, thank you so much for this chat. Thank you so much for sharing some of your research. We hope we will be able to read it soon, so please do publish it. Yes, thank you so much for your time, and we are looking forward to having you back at Frisky, maybe in the future with more work.
Thank you so much for having me.